So we stopped at the time when he was born, and I started explaining why he considered himself a Polish Jew born under the Russian occupation. Now you tell me, what do you know about the history of Poland and how deep I should go into this? Is this quote clear to you or not? I mean, in terms of the history. It is. Okay. Or not. It is. Okay. So I will get to here and I will explain really briefly because this will show it the way. So red lines are the borders of Poland, the independent Poland. Okay? So Poland as a country has almost 1,000 years, but then it was swallowed literally by 3 giants. That is Germany, Hungary, Prussia, Austria, Hungary, and Russia. And practically these 3 giants swallowed it the way that Poland stopped existing. So when we're talking about Poland in the 19th century, there was no Poland per se. And Korczak, about whom we're talking, was living and born and having his education on the territory which is formally, like in the previous years, Polish, but it was Russian. It was the Russian Empire. So literally, this is this green part. That was Russia at the time. Because of it, he studied in Russian. His first language at school was Russian, although at home with his parents and his boyfriends, he spoke Polish, and Polish was his mother tongue, but in the school, he would speak Russian. When he went to the university, it was Russian. The history of Jews in Poland, where Korczak was born and raised. So Jews were brought to Poland, literally invited during 13th, 14th, 15th century from other countries in Europe where they were considered rate number 2, 3, 4, and below. They were welcome to Poland, and Poland opened its doors to Jews. But the roles Jews were playing in Poland were being the tax collectors for landlords. So they were like a midwife between the actual producers and the rich people. So the ones who were actually working hated them because of what they were doing. They were collecting taxes, but they were very handy and useful for those who were wealthy and did not want to do the job. So Jews were 1/3 of the population of Poland in the centuries closer to ours, 18th and 19th. And they lived okay together with the Polish people. They didn't feel being treated bad. Then these petitions happened, and Poland became literally swallowed by other countries. And that was a unique moment in the history of Poland in the 19th century especially, when the Polish intelligentsia and the Jewish intelligentsia had the same goal, to become independent. And they all spoke Polish as their native language. And the Polish culture was the united culture for them. So that was the period when there was very low anti-Semitism in Poland, and the Jews were welcome and they were working together. That was the time when he was born. And his name at the time he was born was Henry Goldschmidt. He was called like this after his grandfather. Their family was very much from intelligentsia. His grandfather was a medical doctor. His father was a lawyer. His mother was a housewife, just had 2 children. So a very wealthy family. Very much cultured Jews, very much non-Jewish in terms of religion. And to some extent, that is the same story. He didn't know he was Jewish because the family never spoke Yiddish. The family spoke Polish. The Polish culture was their culture. He didn't know he was Jewish until, I want to show you this. This is Poland as part of Russia in the 19th century. So this is Russia. It's a huge country. It's 1/6 of the whole world. The territory has, I think, 8 time zones, if I'm not mistaken. The time of the flight between Moscow and Vladivostok is more than from Vancouver to London. So it's literal, like you are crossing the whole world. And this is all Russia. The part on the very right, the red one, that is former Poland. It was all swallowed by Russia. Okay? Now, here's, let me bring it, this one, and I'll go back. So I want to tell you a story which Korczak talks about in his diary, how he learned that he was Jewish. So he had a pet, a little bird, and the bird died, and he wanted to bury a bird. But the nanny said no, the maid said no. Why? Because it's a bird. And then what was most important, of course, for children from their peers or a little older, the janitor's son said, no, because the bird is Jewish. Why? Because you are Jewish, and your bird is also Jewish, and you don't bury a bird, and you don't put a cross. Now think of the mentality and the emotions of the 5-year-old kid who all of a sudden learns he's Jewish, his bird was Jewish. So the world all of a sudden is kind of going backwards. You thought you would have a happy life? No. And this is what stuck with him. That's how he started thinking and living his life. And he also spoke with his parents. He learned what being a Jew meant, and that was a different life for him from that moment on. So, but until his father got sick, he had a life of a wealthy kid. He would communicate, he had a sibling, a sister, so 2 kids, a wealthy family, no problems in terms of wealth. They lived in a beautiful condo in downtown Warsaw, so excellent. Everything is great. And you know, I'm sure everyone can relate to some episode in your own lives when everything goes well until. And it started being kind of annoying and disturbing. His father started getting into very strange situations when he was so angry, and he would behave in a very strange way that even a child would notice this. And it became more and more annoying until his father got into the type of emotions that he was admitted into a madhouse. And he was diagnosed with a mental sickness. And since that time, and he was in his early teens, since that time the father was in and out of the mental facility, mental asylum. You can imagine how it feels. You are not only Jewish, you are also a son of a mentally not really good person. That puts double pressure on you. So at that time and later on in life, Korczak became very close with his mother. And his mother was what is called helicopter mother. So she was very much in control. And he was shy, and he was a very home kid, you know. He would rather stay at home than being out with the kids. So his mother was a huge influence on him for the rest of his days, and they had a very strong bond. emotionally and intellectually. His mother really made an impression on him, and it stayed. He was brilliant in terms of literature, and that was his first passion. I want to bring you back to the way he's writing in his memoirs, his diary. He's writing about his mother, and his mother was this type of, I can relate because my mom was the same type, like, yeah, it's okay, but that kid did it better. So that's exactly what his mother was doing to him. Like, yeah, you're good, you're kind-hearted, but why would you prefer to play with kids of a janitor, or why would you play with babies? You're of a certain age, you have to be in a circle of friends. So everything like, it's okay, but. And you probably at some point in your life you had that but, when your parents want the best from you, but the way that it kind of diminishes your own self-esteem and dignity. So he was 10 in this picture. In fact, he put this photo, that's the first known photo of Korczak. He put this photo in his book, King Mat I. It starts with this photo, and it starts with the words where he is saying, I want you readers see me as a child, and kind of relate King Mat to this photo. That's what a child looks like, that I, as a writer, at some point was in your shoes. Look at me, that is me, right? So he's talking about, as you can read, right? Schools were awful, mine was boring, you were not allowed to do anything, they kind of caned you there. And that is before 14, and then he all of a sudden overgrew it. He all of a sudden felt he's becoming something valuable. He started writing short stories, novels, when he was very young. And that was his idea. He wanted to become a professional writer. In fact, that's how his name came out, Janusz Korczak. He wanted to submit his novel for the competition, for the contest, literature contest. And he wanted his name not to sound Jewish, which was Goldschmidt. You don't have, yep, okay. So that's okay, Jacqueline, that's okay, thank you. So he was thinking what name to take. And he looked at different places, and all of a sudden, in front of him, there was a book. The title of the book had these words, Janusz Korczak. And he put this name, Janusz Korczak, there, but the middle person somewhere made a mistake in Janusz and put it Janusz. And it became Janusz Korczak, and that's how it became known to the world and sticks today. If you say to somebody, do you know Henry Goldschmidt? Many people would say, no, who's that? If you say, do you know Janusz Korczak? More people, yeah, I agree, yeah. But more people would say, yes, I do know Korczak, I heard the name. So this is one of the reasons, by the way, many Poles, even today, don't know that Janusz Korczak was Jewish. They would say, oh yeah, Janusz Korczak in Poland, everyone knows, he's part of the curriculum. And people would say, yeah, that's a Polish hero. And when you start talking and keep talking and would come out that he was Jewish, was, for some people, it's kind of a surprise, really. Polish name, everything Polish. But this name stuck with him. So he started writing, and it became really his crazy obsession. And one of the things in his life, which was another obsession, being an intellectual from a very early age, and at the same time being kind of not really social, he had a lot of time to think. I recently read an incredible phrase from Carl Jung, who says, thinking is hard, most people judge. Just think of that. So he started to think. And one of his thoughts was about what he was, what was his role on earth. And it brought him to the idea of a suicide as well. So he was writing, and one of the things which was really, really difficult for him was the mental health of his father. His father finally passed away, but when he was 18. But for the last years of his father's life, he could not work, because who would hire a lawyer who is mentally not good, right? So Korczak, the family moved to a smaller condo, to a place which was not as good as it was before. And Korczak was put in the position that he had to earn living for the family because mother didn't have any professional training and he had a sister, so he had to provide for the family. So what is interesting, he was going to same condos of his friends, but if before he was getting into the entrance door, you would understand the metaphor, yeah? Now it's the back door. And from a child, bless you, the child who was entrance door child, you all of a sudden become a back door child. Would you get that? Yeah, it's a totally different perception. You're the same person. You feel inside you're the same person with the same knowledge, same beauties, same non-beauties, but the door is different and they treat you very differently. Why would you come through the back door? Because he became their coach. He was bright. He had to make money. So he would go to, say, wealthy kids to train them in different classes, in different subjects. And he did it well. And that's how he made money for the family. And finally, when he graduated from high school, in fact, he had to repeat one class. When he graduated, 1 year, when he had to do the whole thing, he graduated and he entered Warsaw University. As I said, Warsaw at the time was part of Russia. And at the time, as for years ahead, a medical university was from the very start. You chose to be a doctor at the age of 18. That's what he chose. That was his grandfather's profession. Plus, he remembered his father, mental disease. He wanted to treat people. So he realized literature is not the path where you can actually treat people, but medicine is. And he chose that. That became his passion. And through that passion, that's the medical uniform. So the family moved to, as I said, to a much smaller space. And the family was completely dependent on him. He kept writing as well, but more and more he understood that he needed to get his training as a doctor and become really good, which he did. And from very early on, this whole obsession about the mental disease of his father brought him to the idea that he should not get married. This is a very difficult decision for a young man to really decide that if I get married, I will have children, and my children might inherit from me this disease which my father had. Think behind us over a century ago, medical sciences were not as advanced as they are now. Not to say that they are very advanced now, but more than before, which means that when you make a decision and you think really thoroughly about what kind of heritage you give to your possible children, he felt he didn't have the moral right to do so. This is what literature says. I also think he probably didn't really meet a woman who he would have been so passionately in love with, and she would be so passionately in love with, that they would forget about this whole thing and would get married. So whatever happened, happened. He was never married. And he decided to never have children. His youth was wild enough. He would go to brothels. He would go to different types of women. Not that he was a monk. No, he was not. But he realized, and by the way, there are also some documents, I don't know how true it was, that his father was sick with some bad diseases. I wouldn't call them by the name, but kind of diseases you can see when you are having intercourse, sexual intercourse. And his father was very much this type of a person who would have this kind of connections above and beyond the family. So that was another thing for him to think. And, you know, antibiotics came much later in history, so there was no treatment for that kind of diseases. Yeah, and that would affect mental health as well, of course. So he was under this moral and emotional pressure, and he was cautious about that too. So he never had a wife. He never had children, and all those orphans became literally his own children. And when at one point in Warsaw Ghetto, there was a group to rescue him from the ghetto, he said, how about children? And the head of the group said, okay, we'll take the children. How many do you have? 3, 4? They thought he was talking about his own family. And he said, no, I have 192. And it's like, seriously? 192? So, no, it won't happen. So, back to his decision. No family, no children. Then the wife becomes medicine. And within the medical field, what was most appealing to him? Pediatrics. Why? Because he felt for children. And there's one more thing. I call it a huge talent. Not everyone has. Very rare people do. That is to remember how the child feels, to remember how the child learns, just to keep this child within yourself. Does it help? A lot. If you're a teacher, if you're a medical doctor, you need to remember, you need to process as a child would, and it's usually smarter. It's usually more profound. It's usually non-restrictive as us adults would think or feel. In that boarding school where I started working, I remember I had very long hair, and at some point I cut my hair. So I came to the class, and I had short hair. I didn't have a class. It was completely ruined. The kids were like, and I said, so what? I couldn't understand what was happening. Oh, and then one, the most active, said, can I touch your hair? Why would you touch my hair? Yeah, it's short now. We want to touch how it looks and how it feels. So I had to let that kid touch my hair. Then everyone in the class, can I touch your hair? So what I was doing for the rest of the class, I was coming and bending to each kid, and each wanted to touch. And you know, when I started working there, and as I said, I'm from a full family, like comfortable childhood, and you come to the children who are so deprived of many things, right? And some of them look, that is a huge mistake I did. Some of them look like you immediately fell in love with a kid. Curly hair, beautiful, eyes open, looking at you. And there are some who look uglier, right? And it's kind of difficult to immediately embrace everyone. So I was passing by, because I usually walked when I was teaching, yeah, and I put my hand on the head of one kid just without thinking. What I noticed next, and they were really deprived of care and positive emotions in their families, each of them was bending in the aisle. Just think of that. Kids wanted a touch. So I learned, as I said before, so much from these kids. I don't know how much they learned from me, but I learned real life lessons from them. You need to be very, and I bet you, if I were a child, I wouldn't have done it, because that was not smart. You don't put a hand on someone's head without thinking each wants the same. The kid wouldn't have done it. I did. Stupid adult. So Korczak managed to keep this child within himself. This is a rare ability. It's a talent. It's either given or not. But as medical doctors, nurses, teachers, educators, child advocates, we need to train ourselves to feel like children. Otherwise, nothing would happen, because each time we would think, as that vice principal of mine said, are you Jewish or what? And then we would say, are you a child or what? Grow up finally. No, just keep this child within yourself. Try to understand what a child feels and thinks, right? So what was happening with Korczak, on the one hand, he was an intellectual. He was a real intellectual. And he knew you never stop learning, especially in the field like medicine, right? There's never like, okay, I know everything. Never. The same about education. Welcome, Jonathan. So, and because of that, he was learning again and again and again. He would go to London, he would go to Berlin, he would go to Paris. He would learn, and he was training himself and going through training in different children's hospitals. When he came back to Warsaw, and Warsaw had a huge number of children who were deprived, and of course, the public health didn't exist in terms of for free. So what was he doing? He was working as a pediatrician during the daytime, and then during the evenings, he didn't have a family, he didn't have his own children. He would go to very poor areas and treat poor children for free. So his life split into two parts, made him realize more and more children, especially from poor families, demanded a lot in terms of what they were deprived of. They so much needed real medical help, but even more, they needed attention and care of caring adults. How many caring adults were in your lives, if you think for a second? It's never enough, right? As many as you had, it's wonderful to have more. It's wonderful to all of a sudden to meet with somebody who's your teacher or your doctor or your nurse or somebody who shows genuine interest in you. So I'm talking extremely polite because it's all private business. I mean, you will lose your business if you're not polite. So the woman is talking with me on the phone, just the whole process, just incredible, like a walk in the park. Yeah, and at the end of the conversation, I'm saying, oh, I'm so impressed with your politeness and the way you just did it all. Thank you so much. A pause. She's not trained to respond to the compliment. That's exactly the opposite way. So a long pause, and then she says, anything else, ma'am? I said, no, thank you. She said, thank you again, blah, blah, blah. So there's a script. She's following the protocol. But if you think of this, children are much more spontaneous. Children are much more flexible. A child would immediately switch. The adult has a script. So Korczak is learning very quickly, and because he has this child within him, he is learning how to actually deal with children. And because of it, children see the same person in him. They don't see an adult in him. They see an equal, which is the biggest compliment the child can pay you. That is, oh, you're like us. That's a real compliment. Very few people get it. But when you get it, it's not like you went down, you went up. Because then you can embrace this whole world of childhood, all of them. You can treat them the way they deserve. There's an incredible book which Korczak wrote much later in life. It's called When I'm Little Again. It's kind of a fairy tale. And When I'm Little Again is like overnight, a teacher wakes up and he is a school child in the same school where he is teaching. And his mother is cooking breakfast for him and saying, you will be late for school. And he goes to the same school, but as a school child. Now imagine this. You are tall, you're an adult, you're a teacher, you have all the authority in your hands, and all of a sudden you're here. You are lower physically, you are lower in the position, you are there to sit and listen to and comply with the rules. If you ever think and put yourself in this position for at least an hour, you would understand how children feel. And when children look at you like bored and you're a teacher, that's a sign, right? That's a sign something you are doing wrong. It's not the sign to punish. I had a teacher at school, you know, in Soviet schools, the discipline was strict. I had a teacher of physics. Whenever a child, we had a bright kid, really bright in physics, whenever he would raise his hand to ask a question, she would say, Victor, that corner, there, an hour. I realized long after she never knew answers. So he was a huge threat to her intellectual world. So instead of hearing his question or letting him speak, the corner, he learned very quickly that he shouldn't even raise his hand. So children learn. But when you put yourself in the shoes of a child and you think of why it's so important to do it. I was once in Birmingham in the UK observing an elementary school. You know what struck me most? When the teacher at elementary school was coming up to every desk, she was bending on her knees and her eyes were at the level of the eyes of the children. Just think of this. That's a very simple thing, but I can't bend now. So if you bend and your eyes are at the same level, it's a totally different way of approaching a child. He or she doesn't feel like you are intimidating, you are a power above, you are equal. And if you know something more or a little less, there's no threat. And if you ever taught at any place, you would know children are quite often, more often than not, are more knowledgeable than adults in a certain field. And the best way to connect with the child is to let the child teach you something which you don't know, and you sincerely accept this new knowledge. That's a trick which adults could play, but it works. When the child is put in the position he or she knows something, it's a totally different world. Then the teacher is not like a huge power brought to evaluate your knowledge or your no knowledge. It's actually the world which is equal, which is okay. I know this, he knows that. Korczak learned this, and being with the children who were sick, who were from very humble beginnings, he realized these are the children who needed him most. And he felt more and more during his first formative years as an adult, as a professional, that is the field he wanted to actually pursue. And he started with being a tutor in summer camps. So he felt like he brought a ball for volleyball, he brought a couple of books, he went to the summer camp, and he thought life would be rosy, you know. And all of a sudden, all these kids out of the school, fresh air, and they're so not disciplined what to do with them. He was terrified. He thought he knew. Nothing of the kind. So his first experience with the children actually being outside was very unruly and very difficult for him. He realized, frankly, it's not what he expected. And then he was learning. And he was learning really hard. And for the next few years, the dilemma within him, emotional and intellectual, was what to choose, medicine or being an educator. And he finally made a decision. And he wrote for a long time afterwards, and he felt this way, that he was betraying medicine and children, sick children, but he made his choice. And starting from 1912, he became a director of Dom Sirot. Dom, the word dom is the house. Sirota, in the plural, sirot means orphans. So this is the orphan's home. This is the house for children who didn't have parents, and those were Jewish children. The street in which the house was built is called Krakhmalna Street. Jerry, does it have any meaning, Krakhmalna? No, yeah. Not really? No? And it was in a very good location in Warsaw, and the building itself was exceptionally good because it was actually built by the architect, and Korczak was very much involved in deciding how and what should be in the building. So it's not like bringing children into something which exists. He actually thought of how the building for children should be created to become most comfortable, most convenient for them. Just going, yeah, sure, of course.
There was a group of people who supported it. It was a big building, it was a huge project, and of course there was a question of finances. But it was his dear friend, the pediatrician,
whose name we kind of know from Jane,
Dr. Eliasberg. Dr. Eliasberg and also his wife were absolutely instrumental in supporting financially, not just financially, this project. And what's extraordinary is that the granddaughter of Dr. Eliasberg is today with us.
Is Jane, and Jane was very gracious to send the photo, which I put into here. So, there were several people, and Dr. Ellisberg was one of very influential and very really generous in his donations. So, going then further in history, this house was then moved in 1940 and then finally moved into the building which was within the was a ghetto. So there are a few photos of the building itself. As you see, there's a huge dining room like this common room where everyone could be and enjoy and have meals and also have meetings together. That is the way it was built. And I wouldn't be wrong if I say it was probably exceptional at the time, right? Like maybe the only one in the world which existed this way. Children had this white sheets, beautiful beds, and if you think of this now, of course it looks like so many kids in the same room. So this is again something different. Kids were very much involved in running and helping, so they were peeling potatoes, as you see. The boys in the kitchen, the girls outside in good weather. So the kids were very much involved. And again, if you have smaller, younger siblings, or if you remember yourself, when a girl or a boy is growing and the mother is doing something in the kitchen, kids love helping, right? They would make a mess of it, but they love helping, say, oh, can I bake a cake? Can I do this? Can I do that? And mothers usually say, no, 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 no. Go play. And then years later, we're surprised they don't want to help us at home because they were never allowed to do it. So Korczak understood that, and also it was a necessity, of course. He couldn't hire many people, so they were very much involved in different activities about the house. So I want you to read this, where he's writing in this ghetto diary. He's talking about being a Jew and being a Pole. And he says, that's exactly, frankly, how I felt living in the Soviet Russia. We are from one land. We have suffered, we live together under the sun, the same earth. Our journey has been a long one. Let us work together. Let us support, comfort each other. Let us grow and learn together. And unfortunately, to this day, we didn't learn this very simple lesson. We all are constructed of bones and flesh and the same red blood. And all our distinguished features, they come much later in life. We're first born as human beings. If we could remember that, if we can start teaching like that, maybe the next generation would have a happier life. So here I want you to see the photo, and again, Jane, thank you for sending it out. This is Isaac and Stella Ellisberg, and they were ones of real big donors. And in this picture, in the group picture, if you see the person with the mustache, that is Isaac Ellisberg as well, with the children. So I wanted to show you, going back to history, what happened during the World War I. So before World War I, as I said, Poland was part of Russia. And other parts of Poland were under Austria or under Germany. During the First World War, all three suffered a lot: Germany, Russia, and Austria. And as one of the results, as one of the consequences, which was very positive for Poland, finally Poland, as an independent state, was reborn in 1918. So this red, which shows Gdańsk, Poznań, Warsaw, you see that in the center, that is actually Poland as an independent country, finally, after over a century ago. So now Korczak is in the new country, which was independent, but before that, Many things happened in his life. He went through a number of wars because he was a doctor, and as a medical professional, he had to be in the army. And what is really incredible, to remain sane, to remain intact in his mentality and his emotions, right during the war, actually in the war, he started writing one of his most incredible books, that is How to Love a Child. If you think of this, if you imagine the situation, there are bombs, you hear this, you can be killed like this very moment, and you are writing the title of the book, How to Love a Child. Pretty amazing, right? But I guess when you are in the war zone and you feel like tomorrow could be your last day, you are trying to say something most important. You are trying to put on paper something which would stay with the next generation, something you actually want to leave after you are gone. How to Love a Child. If you think of the title, and if you're a parent or a teacher, it might sound kind of crazy. What does it mean, how to love a child? Of course I love my children. Of course I kind of love my students. And I kind of know how to do it. But Korczak literally puts it into a different perspective, into a different hemisphere, if you wish. Korczak is talking about how to really love a child, meaning how to respect the child. When you quarrel with your spouse or boyfriend, if you have one, or girlfriend, at times the question comes, do you respect me? But the first one, do you love me at all? Do you respect my opinion? So Korczak starts with children. Do you love them? Do you respect them? And if you do you consider their opinions? Or respect and love come by itself and their opinions come separately because they're younger, they're smaller, and why should I really bother? Have you ever thought of that? Who would say I don't love my child? Hardly anyone. Who would say I really listen to my child and do what the child prompts me? That's a very different story. Because every parent usually feels like, okay, I know better. But if you go deeper into this, none of us was really professionally trained to be a parent, right? We're trained to be doctors, nurses, legal officers, educators, teachers. We were never really trained to be parents. Why? Because it feels like it's biologically inherited. You give birth to a child, and then all of a sudden, overnight, you know how to do it. And you don't, right? You don't. And each day your child surprises you more often than not. Did anyone train us to really listen to our child? No, because it feels like we're parents. Yeah, we're supposed to know it. No one will bring you into the classroom and would say, teach. No. You need to have 4 years of education. You need a certificate of a teacher. And there's a huge group of people who would test you before you are brought into the school building, right? But here you are with a baby. You're a parent. Welcome to the world of parenthood. How are we parenting our children? By mistakes we make daily. And then we learn. And Korczak tries to predict these mistakes, but not from the point of view of an educator or trainer or coach who actually trains us how to do it, but from the point of view of a child. He is a real child advocate who tells us, you dummy, you didn't do it right because I, as a child, would do it this way. And this is an incredible role he plays for us through his experience, through what he did, and of course mostly through his writings. He shows how to love a child, and that's real. That's real training, and that's very unique. So let's look here. We're going back to Poland. 1920s is kind of rebirth of many things. Joseph Pilsudski is the one who is the head of Poland at the time, and he is the one who says Poland is for everyone, for Jews, for Poles, for every other ethnicity living here, citizenship for all. This is the time when the Jewish intelligentsia is thriving, the Polish intelligentsia is thriving. This is the country where is the Renaissance, if you wish. How do you pronounce French? Renaissance, yeah? No, I mean in French. Renaissance. Okay. So that is this period in Poland. And in fact, what Korczak wrote at the time is really, really exemplary. But how can you have a person like this who is so much ahead of his time for long? No. And very, very shortly in history, there came another person. But I want to bring you to this particular period in his life when he was a prolific writer, and he did a number of things, and we will hear from different presenters. Because of it, I'm doing it so quickly, because we will have presenters who would talk about these topics. So King Mat I, that's one of the best children's books I ever read. Seriously, I strongly recommend. This is about a child who became the king, what happened to him as a ruler of the country, how much he didn't know. He finally ends up almost murdered. Then he's sent to a deserted island, and that's the second part of the book, which is called King Mat on a Deserted Island. So I'm not going into telling you the story, but I would strongly recommend to read it. It's very easy reading. And it gives you a perspective of a child being a ruler. Another thing which happened with Korczak, he was a journalist. He wrote a lot. And then he realized, why only me or any adult? Let's give the word to children. And finally, and very quickly, he started this first in the world children's newspaper, Little Review, where all the journalists were children. And again, the perspective of children is pretty incredible. Have you ever been in the classroom where the teacher would say, today you are teachers, I'm just sitting in the back? Have you ever been in these situations? And you would think there will be a mess. Now, in fact, children are much more strict than their current teacher. And they try to rule, to discipline, to have everything orderly. Did you ever experience this? So you would know what I mean, right? So when you give children the ability, the possibility, the space to work like a responsible person, they take this responsibility very seriously. This is what was happening with this Little Review. It became a very popular newspaper, the books and Little Review. So he tried to kind of split his life, and I'm sure those of you who managed to be multitask people and to split your lives into several spheres, have you ever felt like you are kind of betraying one of them or two of them and doing great in another one, but you would rather do something better in another one and one more, but it's never like equally, like, can you take yourself as a personality and split it into equal parts, or your brain or your emotions? You give yourself fully to something, right? So that was what was happening with Korczak. His heart was stolen by children. So it was forever given to children. Everything else he was doing was done great, but children were his priority. There was another great educator, absolutely not known in the Western world. He lived in Ukraine. His name was Vasily Sukhamlinsky. And if you are interested, I can give you references in English. So he was born in 1918, and he was a principal of a village school, and he was absolutely great. But what I want to mention, he wrote a book, many books, one of them especially, and it is translated into English. You can check on Amazon. It's entitled, My Heart I Give to Children. I was thinking this is a great metaphor for Korczak, because that's exactly what he did. He gave his heart to children. In Sukhamlinsky's life, he was wounded during the Second World War, and one of the bullets was so close to the heart that when they did a surgery on him, they couldn't take it out without actually ruining him. So he had literally part of the bullet next to his heart. And when finally it started moving, he was 52 years old, he died. And he literally died in the school building. So that was September 1st, that was the first day of school, and he lost his consciousness. They got him to the hospital. Next day he died. But before that, he wrote one of those incredible books, My Heart I Give to Children. Korczak gave his heart to children the same physical way. He died with them in gas chambers. But as I said before, to me, this is not heroism. What he was doing all his life was heroic. Would you agree? Because, as we said, you die with your child, of course. How can you let the child go? But when you live with them all your life, you go through everything with them, that is heroism. What I didn't mention before, when Korczak came from the war, he got sick with typhus, and typhus was a big thing at the time. And he was very sick at the time. He was visiting with his mother, and his mother, being a mother, insisted that he would stay at home and she would take care of him. And what happened, as it would happen, she contracted typhus from him. And while he survived, she did not. But being a mother, her last words and her last wish was, take me through the back door for him not to see that I am gone. As a mother would, right? Even dying, thinking about her child. So after he got recovered and he learned about what happened to his mother, he felt like that's exactly what he did. He killed his mother. And he was about to commit a suicide. He felt like, what did I do? That's my mother. And she died because of me. So I go next. He didn't do it. In fact, there's a historic fact. He wrote to his sister saying, let's commit a suicide together. Our mother is gone. Right? Fortunately for the children and for the humanity, he did not do it. He stayed. But that was one of the episodes which I wanted to share with you, that I want you to understand he was real. He was a human being. He was not some, exemplary, 100% wonderful person. He had his ups and downs, as anyone. And especially in the last years of the orphanage, when he was in the Warsaw ghetto, he was so much in despair. He would drink vodka. He would stay at night thinking, getting himself drunk, thinking how to feed children. Because when your children are starving and you don't know how to bring a potato to them, you would do anything. He was writing and doing actual, like literally on his knees begging for food for the children. And there's no, no humility in that, like being on your knees. That's actually a great act of showing that you're really human. You understand that that's children. They can't provide for themselves. I have to do it as an adult. So later on in the Polish culture, in 1930s, this gentleman who never had a real big political position, Dwomski is his last name, but he was a huge nationalist. And his idea of Poland was Poland for Poles. Have you heard of things like this? Germany for Germans, Poland for Poles, America for white Americans, etc. We know different examples of fascists all over the history, right? So this guy started this incredible and very fast spreading policy: Jews do not belong. Ukrainians do not belong. Poles do. And that became a nightmare for every Polish Jew living in the country. If before, during the Russian era, the Polish language was forbidden, now being Jewish meant being rate number 3 or 4 or down below. And this is a huge slap on the face. And even in this era, politically, very difficult and very challenging, Korczak managed to keep the orphanage up and to let children live their lives as best as he could. So, yes, of course.
Did he go by Korczak?
Korczak, yeah.
Korczak, even during...
All the
while
time,
he was
yeah,
alive?
all the time, yeah, all the time. In fact, it's good you asked. There was a radio show, and it was called Old Doctor Radio Show. He was the one. He was a radio man, a showman on the radio, weekly, for many years. And the radio director was kind of, let's not give the name, let's keep it Old Doctor. Like, no one really knew that was a Jewish person. In 1930s, it became kind of survival thing. Let's not say that's a Jewish doctor whom all the Poles will send letters and ask for advice. That was a Pole. But it came to the point when the director of the radio station had to bring him in and say, I'm sorry, we have to stop. Why? Well, you know. Why? Well, you know, you're Jewish. So what? You're Jewish. And like, you know, it's like my mom would hear as a pediatrician in the Soviet days, you're a really good doctor in spite of being Jewish. That was like, yeah, you're great as a radio showman, but you know, enough is enough. We cannot go on with that. So at that time, many of Korczak's graduates would immigrate to Palestine. And that was the time when Palestine started as a nation. There were many things around it. I'm not going into history. I'm sure some of you know. There were lots of difficulties in this way, and many of them would write to Korczak and say, come, live with us in kibbutz. Do you know the concept of he refused it? So there were two. But the major one which we're talking is about is the one for Jewish children. So the war started in September 1939. and Poland was immediately in one day occupied by the Nazi Germany. If you know from history, it was an agreement between the Soviet Union, between Stalin and Hitler. They practically agreed that they would give up Poland, but that would allow the Soviet Union not to get into the war per se. But the fascist Germany still broke up this agreement 2 years later, and the Second World War for Russia started on June 22nd, 1941. But those 2 years when Poland was literally given to Hitler, in return, Russia received those 2 years. But Poland was absolutely betrayed. Poland under Hitler is a totally different story. The population of Poland was at some point 1/3 were Jewish. Then it was less, but still there was a big Jewish population in Poland. And at the very beginning, the plan which Hitler announced was kind of using Jews for work, like having labor camps and using Jews as like third power just to work for the Nazis. And then he realized too many Jews. Let's eliminate them physically. Let's clean the earth from Jews. This policy came later, and because of that, not immediately the ghetto were constructed in different places, but a little later during the Polish War. So the Warsaw Ghetto per se was created in 1940, and only later in the year, in 1940, the orphanage, which was completely Jewish orphanage, was moved into the ghetto. So this is the map of the ghetto, the way it was developed. And as you see, this kind of greenish yellowish, that is the ghetto. But in between, you see those small spots? Because there were so many Jews and they lived all over in Warsaw, it was very difficult to have something which would be absolutely Jewish. So those small spots could be church, a Christian church or Catholic church mostly. Yeah, so different places which were not the ghetto. And there were electric trains or trams which would go from one area in the ghetto through the Aryan area and then back into the ghetto, and there would be no stop for Jews, like, you know. So if you can imagine, you are in the cage. You are allowed out of the cage, but only to get into another cage. And you are passing by, and you kind of see a different life, like normal. But for a very short period of time, and then you're back in the cage, and the door is locked, and you're inside, and you feel like a mouse trapped. But when there are so many people, and most of them were really educated people, so there was life in the Warsaw Ghetto. There were theater productions, believe me or not. There were schools which were kind of illegal under, you know, the tablecloth, but they were functioning. There were universities which were functioning in the ghetto. There were doctors who were providing services. Everything was functioning, because if you think of the human nature, you would understand, like, people can live and work under any circumstances. You make it harder, we resist. You make it even harder, we still resist. Because that's the nature. And that's what was happening. And besides, of course, Jews have a huge history of survival. But not this time. Most of the Warsaw Ghetto was killed, this way or another way. And by 1943, after the uprising of the ghetto, most people, they say 97%, of course, when it's such a huge territory, there were places like underneath where children could go through. And Korczak would actually let children go or bring something inside. Children became the providers. Where the adult could not, children could, because they were smaller physically or they knew different ways. And for children, when they were in the Aryan side, it was easier to hide. Many children were smuggled out of the ghetto, and they survived. The way they were trying to smuggle children were mostly the children who did not look Jewish, like if they had light hair, if they had light eyes, you know, not hazel eyes, not black hair, it was easier. Many actually Catholics would save children, give them different names. We will have an incredible presentation about this next week. There would be Tila Mazel, who is a writer. I think she's presenting on Tuesday for us. She wrote a book about Irena Sendler, or Irena Sendlerova. Irena Sendler smuggled, together with the people she organized, 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw ghetto. It's pretty incredible. She was a tiny woman, under 150 centimeters. And this tiny woman, with incredible perseverance and commitment, not only smuggled all those kids, but she kept the list of all the names, so the real name and the name given. And many of them, after the war, who survived, they actually learned their real names. Because when the child is smuggled and the child is small, all you need for this child to remember a new name, that he or she is a Catholic, and forget about your Jewishness, right? But after that, children tend to forget. And some children, especially when they were little, they would consider their Catholic parents their parents. But if somebody from the family survived, of course they wanted to find that child. And only because of her list, which she managed to do, the children found their families and their relatives. So we will have this presentation. The person here on the right, that's a very controversial figure. I want to explain it. When Jews were put into ghettos, Nazis needed some Jewish leadership within the ghetto. Not because they respected Jews, but because they knew the Jewish leadership would be easier and better for Jews to understand what was happening. So in every ghetto, there was a Jewish leader, there was Jewish police, and there were many collaborators. But collaborators per se, because they were all finally killed sooner or later. They were just middle wives between the victims and the Nazis first, and then when the cage became too tight, they were also killed. So Chernikov was one of them. He was the head of the Warsaw ghetto. And when it came to 1942, and he received all the orders that everyone in the ghetto is going east, and Nazis were saying, we're relocating. He knew better than anyone that relocation was death. So he committed a suicide because he understood there's no way. He tried to help and save the children, but there was no way. So the last days, and how should I put it? Korczak was a very wise person. He knew from day one in the ghetto, he knew the end is coming and it would be the end. But as with medical doctors, tell me if I'm wrong, when you know the children, this child is going to die because you can't treat this child, right? Because medical science today doesn't know how. you still do your best. And you still try to let this child live to the very end, a full life, right? So that's how Korczak felt. In 1939, he was what he called an old man, 60. Crazy, yeah? Sounds like old man. Yeah, and he knew the end would be such, death. But at the same time, he also knew these children, some of them would live only 10 years old, some would live only 12 or 14 or 7. But he wanted them to live. At the same time, he wanted them to be prepared to that last journey. So in July 1942, he did what he would do on a regular basis, a theater performance. In July 1942, July 18th, if you think of this, July 18th and then August 5th, when they were all deported to Treblinka, 17 days apart. Did he know? Of course he did. Was he sure that's the only way and there's no way to rescue them? Of course he did. And they had a performance by Rabindranath Tagore, Post Office. I actually never knew until recently why the Indian writer, is the name known to you, Rabindranath Tagore? Not really. So Rabindranath Tagore was a great philosopher and humanist and educator and writer, and he wrote a number of poems and also plays. And they lived practically at the same time. And he was part of the Polish curriculum, which I didn't know. So for every Pole and every Polish teacher, Tagore would be a very common name, would be known. They would be familiar with what he did. So Korczak chose a play which is called Post Office. And in this play, the main character is dying. And the whole performance is about this little boy, not so little, he is 10, and this Amal, the boy, the main character, is dying, and there are different characters, different children who meet with him, and there's a king, and just all different, I wouldn't give you the whole plot, yeah, but what was it? It was to prepare children for that angel of death coming for them. But what is striking for me, July 18th, they sent out invitation letters to people in the ghetto. And the whole big room, the largest, was full of people. And there was applause, there were words of congratulations and bravo, and just think of this. People are almost at their door, a death step, yeah? Just next day or a few days. But they still live their full lives. And Korczak, why do we know this? Because Korczak is writing about it in his diary. What is interesting, his secretary, who was Polish, Igor Niewerly, that's a famous figure, and he published a lot afterwards. He survived. And Korczak, refusing to be rescued from the ghetto, told Niewerly that, if anything, I want you to save my diary, because this is a document which I want people to know. So the diary was actually kept and published afterwards. What really struck me when I read it for the first time, the last note is a few days before August 5th. And he's writing very short notes, and he's writing, I'm looking at the soldier who is standing in front of our home. So they had the guards for no one to escape. I'm looking at that soldier. I'm watering the flowers of the orphanage. my bald head is a great target for him to shoot. And then the next phrase, why is he not doing it? And then the next, maybe he was a teacher in his previous life. Maybe he was cleaning streets. Maybe he doesn't know what is happening. Just think of this, a person who went through 3 years of war, who saw more lives gone, more than many, many others, he's still trying to find an excuse for a Nazi soldier standing next to the orphanage. Why? Maybe he doesn't know what is happening. That was really striking for me, because how can you keep this kind of humanity facing all the evil, pure evil, which is happening in front of you, right? This is something which only a person with a huge heart can do. Because when you live through all these circumstances, you would think your heart would harden really much, and you would not look for excuses for Hitler soldiers. But he still tried. There's a great movie called, I would recommend, you can find it on YouTube. It's called Korczak. And Korczak is a movie which was done by a Polish director, Andrzej Wajda, in 1990. It's the iconic, it's the major movie about Korczak. And the movie ends up with an interesting scene. There's this train where the children with Korczak are, and all of a sudden the train stops, and this particular car in which the children are kind of given free way, and this car is in a beautiful field, and the door opens and the children are out, and Korczak is with them, and there's a rainbow and the sun and the sky, and they're leaving, and it feels like they escaped. None escaped, none. But there was a lot of criticism coming from the people who survived the ghetto, like saying Wajda did not do it well. Wajda actually diminished the whole life story of Korczak. I actually think it's a great ending of the movie, showing there's still hope. There's still hope. Because as we said today, lives of children could be very short. But he managed to make them happy as much as he could, right? So there's hope in this world if such people lived, and the story of them and the real story of their lives is preserved. But this whole metaphor of children living with the sun and the rainbow, and it's just really beautiful. So if you ever have a chance, just watch the movie. In some parts it might be not exactly historically correct, but it's a great movie. So we can only think or decide for ourselves what Korczak was thinking about when all of that was happening. A lot. And just thinking back, whether he betrayed the children, maybe he could rescue them, which was never a chance. Or did he do everything he could? Maybe not. If we put ourselves, those who are parents, into the shoes of a parent of 192 children, and you know they're dying tomorrow, it doesn't matter that you die with them, it's just they're dying. So it's in a way a very tragic story, but at the same time, it's such an incredible symbol of humanity. I'm thinking that I know it's too much to get in, right? It's tragic. It's a lot of drama in it. but I thought it would be important for us to really learn his life story. What I'm going to suggest now, and we'll see how it goes, I have these sayings from Korczak over here. So it's not a test at all. I suggest you go here, pick up any, and either choose a partner to discuss. These are quotes from Korczak. Or think through, and then let's say 5 minutes, and then we will discuss it. And then we will go on with the human rights. Please.
And that seriously, they have a right to be treated by adults with tenderness and respect as equals. They would be allowed to grow into whoever they were meant to be. The unknown person inside each of them is the hope of the future.
Okay. Does anyone have the same? No. Excellent. Gwen, go ahead. So what do you think? Oh, both of you, yeah? Yeah. Uh-huh.
I think Clea had a very sort of similar quote. So
Can I read mine too?
Sure,
They
of course.
kind of- This one's got kind of built on it, yeah. In what way is the child's today inferior to his tomorrow? For the sake of tomorrow, everything that makes the child happy, sad, surprised, angry, and preoccupied is disregarded. For the sake of tomorrow, he is robbed of several years of life.
Okay, and Sigrid
I have
does the
the
same,
same,
yeah, as Claire. Okay, so please. Mhm.
And so we sort of talked about how often children, we just tell them just to, we're going to teach you. And so, because we want to prepare you for tomorrow, you listen to the way that this is done so that you will be a good citizen in the future. Or you'll do the right thing for our family in the future. So instead of that, I think what he's emphasizing is that children have something to offer, who have the future and hope for the future to offer.
Which could be different.
Which might not be what I teach them, but maybe we can learn together. In a society.
Respecting that ignorance, I guess, was the sort of, you were mentioning that earlier, that concept of, respecting them for where they are at today. And while he wanted to prepare them for tomorrow, at the same time, it was also allowing them to live their life to the fullest in who they were in that moment today.
If you think about tomorrow and teaching them for tomorrow, do we adults do everything today right for us to teach them how to do it tomorrow? Or we would rather have a different world tomorrow? Then how will they learn how to do differently if we teach them exactly the same? Or are we great parents? We want it to be repeated, or we want our children to become better parents? So.
Yeah, so I have the same
Yeah.
quote. And this has come up a couple of times, especially since I teach high school as well, and how they're not really for tomorrow, they're for today, because they're starting to be at least more developed in their thinking, more developed, and they can actually, well, younger children can also, but in my experience, high schoolers are just adults who haven't made mistakes yet, right? And one way to learn is through mistakes. So for me, it resonates with me just because instead of thinking about tomorrow, what about today? Because their today will shape their tomorrow and their future. And even thinking about like us as educators having gone through, we do have experience and we do have knowledge and wisdom, but at the same time, we are also somewhat the yesterday, not the today.
And not the future.
Yeah.
In many instances. Now, think of this. Do we really talk with children about our own mistakes? Do we accept the fact we did do mistakes in our lives, and here's my mistake, don't do it? But do we preach how not to do it, or we'll let them decide how not to do it their way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you think?
prescriptive rather than.
Yeah, I think it's shorthand.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
We're more prescriptive in terms of when we talk about as adults our mistakes, we talk about it as don't do this, rather than this was something I experienced. Maybe you would experience something or and here's how you're not going to make my mistake. Instead
Yeah.
of, right,
If
the
to
wrong
use-
mindset. And here is don't do this because then you're going to make the same mistake as me, rather than being talking about, oh, I made this mistake, letting them come up with
Right.
solutions and paths, perhaps do it a different way.
Like, if you think about nations, like Germany, after the war, first thing they finally did, they accepted the fact. They killed X number of people. And starting from this acceptance, they managed to develop as a nation. But you have to accept the fact you were mistaken, brutally mistaken. Do we accept this fact in front of the children? Like, I did this horrible mistake, forgive me, or I did this horrible mistake, I don't know why, and if you are in the same situation, I don't know what I can tell you. You have to figure out yourself.
I've come up like, in the past, it was hard for me to do that, but nowadays, because I'm older, I do accept my mistakes and I do apologize, and I ask, how can I make it better? How can I repay somehow or change? And
Does it feel easier to connect when you do this? When you accept the fact you were mistaken?
it hurts. It hurts because I feel like I didn't do the right thing, and it pains me a lot. But then I'm glad if I can make it better and change something.
Let me ask you this. Do you feel like if we tell children as educators or just adults or medical or anyone that we did a horrible mistake and please forgive me, do you think it humiliates you in front of the children?
In my experience, it helps connect me to kids because they are so willing to just, see it as a human thing. Like, oh yeah, we make mistakes. And if I own up and I apologize and I say, I wish I had done something differently, you guys help me think of a way I could have done it differently.
Teach you.
That's right.
Yeah,
and,
teach you.
I mean, the ideas they generate are I learn so much from them. But I find we're so much more connected as human beings. So I don't have to be always the teacher hat. But we can just be human beings learning from one another. And then all of a sudden we're that much closer. So it's not a sense of humiliation at all. It's a sense of vulnerability for sure.
See, I mean,
And the other thing also is I could ask for forgiveness, but they don't have to give it to me because it's their choice. Can
Yeah.
choose to give it to me or not.
Sure, sure. Anyone else on this, please?
You mentioned Germany, and I met some children, high school children. They came visiting in Israel as a delegation, and they knew so much about the Holocaust.
Sorry, could you speak up, please?
I'm just saying that I met some high school children which came in delegation to Israel, and they knew so much about the Holocaust, and they understood so much about being refugees. It was like a few years ago when they had all these refugees coming. So that's the thing. I just praise the education system in Germany that they do that, and they actually telling the kids we made a mistake, and probably it makes it better for the kids to understand that and the world.
I want to, yeah, Jane, go ahead.
I was going to say that when we are able to apologize to a child or share that we made a mistake, we're really teaching them something important then, because we're teaching them that it's okay to make mistakes, that everybody makes mistakes, and that it's okay to apologize, and that there's nothing the matter with you. And it seems like the lesson that an enormous amount of the world is teaching is that you have to maintain face or maintain status is more important than actually owning up to commit. So you grow up with or children grow up feeling like if they make a mistake, there's something deeply the matter with them, rather than that they're human beings. So I think those are the kinds of lessons that are the really important ones to teach by the way we behave with them.
Are there any examples from your lives which you would like to share when you were apologetic or you made a mistake and then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually I want to share one of my personal experience because I know my point is that it's really take lots of courage for us to admit our mistake, especially in front of children. Well, take myself as an example. I'm a teacher. Sometimes I will share one of my childhood experience with you at first. So my parents, because I was born and raised in China, it's a very different cultural background. And then when I was young, China is actually really, really poor. So we don't really get lots of money to buy pretty dress and lots of food. And then so when I grew up, I was talking to my parents about those things, and they actually feel like, because they are really, really, when I was young, they were really, really, how to say it, they're really frugal, so I don't get lots of things. And then they kind of feel sorry for me, but they don't want to say that to me. They just told me, oh, we have to do that, because based on the situation we have to, that's the only thing we can do. But then I know they want to apologize, but it's really hard for them to say it, especially in Chinese culture, usually parents don't say sorry to children. But then when I came to Canada, I started to realize, oh, it's actually okay to say sorry. But it's just, you have to be really, really courageous and brave to admit what you did wrong. You can do that. You can actually try another way. So I guess it's just different perspectives.
Yeah, different cultures for sure. Yeah, please.
I think also, but apologies have to be sincere.
Oh, yeah.
And kids are actually quick to
pick up what, yeah.
I've sometimes said, oh, I'm really sorry I was reactive and I was harsh on you beyond what you did in this situation. It wasn't fair. But what you did caused a lot of angst. So I made that mistake of apologizing and then
That little but so often comes next.
and realizing, oh gosh, that then totally washed away what my previous intent was, right? So yeah, those are my learnings.
I want to share a couple of things. One is I was the organizer. Do you mind if I sit? Thank you. So I was the organizer of a big international conference, one of the first in Moscow in 1993. There was a big group of international scholars coming. And at the end of the conference, and there were over 1,000 teachers, educators in the hall. So at the end of the last day was approaching, and I spoke with the Western group, and I said, guys, who wants to say a word at the very end? And the German psychologist, who became my friend, and he is very famous now, he said, I will do it, Tatiana, but how would I imagine what would come next? So next day in the morning, I'm starting this concluding session, and I'm saying such and such will give the word on behalf of the whole Western delegation. There were 26, I think, of them from very different countries. And he went out on the stage, and mind, it's 1,000 or more people there. And this is Soviet Russia, that is after the perestroika, but still most people connect with the history of the Soviet and the Second World War. And he is from Western Germany. So he's on the stage, he's a big man, very powerfully looking, and he's getting to the edge of the stage, and he says, and he had tears in his voice and eyes, and he says, here I am, the son of the man who wanted to conquer you. My father actually was right here in the suburbs of Moscow. He was among the Nazi army who tried to conquer the world. And I feel ashamed and guilty. And that's how he was talking. And you would think that the people in the audience should immediately start feeling disgust or despising him or feeling hatred. They were applauding him. There were so many with tears in their eyes. During the break, they came up to him and they said, "May I hug you? It's okay. We understand." So this whole attitude, and actually afterwards he told me that that was such an incredible moment for him, because he lived with he was born after the war, but he lived with this feeling of guilt, which has nothing to do with him personally, right? But that was the feeling of a son of a Nazi soldier. And all of a sudden, he looks at those mostly women teachers. Every family in Russia, in this or that way, lost somebody during the Second World War. And he's looking in their eyes, and they're looking back, they applaud, they hug, they understand. And for me, it was also an incredible moment, what really humility can do, the acceptance of the guilt. Russians, remember this. This is so simple, but this is an incredible gesture of respect to children. Okay, does anyone want to share something in respect of what we were talking, or, yes, please.
I think that in the last quote, when they said the child today is inferior to tomorrow, they asked that, and it's really honoring that child's perspective and holding up their knowledge, their perspective, their emotions to adjusting to as adults, but also breaking down that hierarchy between adults and children, which gets translated more than just our relationships, child to child, families, schools, doctors, to our broader society. We see like with the Holocaust, with various things going on today, those all translate and teach children hierarchies.
Don't you think children at times talk within their own groups, saying, these stupid adults, they teach us, but look what they're doing?
Well, they do in high school. That's all of them.
I did anyway.
Yeah, if you look back, yeah.
So actually I want to share a really funny story with you guys, because I was teaching children like age 3 to 5, and they actually really smart. Because I just overhear one child talk to another child say, oh, if you did this, Miss Alice gonna go talk to you. But I tell you, if you just look at her and smile and nod away, and then she will walk away. They actually know how to deal with adults.
Of course, to pretend. Yeah, absolutely. I have a friend whose granddaughter, she was 3 at the time. They noticed she was standing in front of the mirror, and in front of the mirror, a 3-year-old would say, looking at herself, what a beauty, what a charmer. You would think every woman should learn a lesson. That's how to really increase your self-esteem. But a 3-year-old would know. What a beauty, what a charmer. So children are definitely wise. We keep forgetting it, right? And I'm the one among all of you, yeah, I can talk about it, but then when it comes to my daughter or my grandchildren, yeah, I forget about it. But then they teach you a lesson, and you start thinking. Jane?
I was just going to say exactly that what I shared in our group from the quote was, when I have my daughter, the thing that I realized pretty quickly was that she was the teacher, not me. And I was enraged because, I mean, not that that was happening, but because I read an enormous number of books before
How to raise a child.
and nobody spoke about it. So the only thing, you know, but I think because I was raised with his stories, which I consciously was not thinking about when I was in my 30s and my child was born, I think somehow that had just gotten into me because I learned it very quickly. And she changed the way that I taught in the college that I taught in, because I would watch her and I would see how she dealt with things, and that would change the way that I looked at my students. And, you know, yeah, I mean, it was just extraordinary to me how much knowledge exists in the child. And then that made me think back to, you know, times when I've been in school and when, you know, with other children, and we knew, and everybody, but we just got discounted because we were short and hadn't been around for very long.
I wanted to
It's such
share
a
with
waste,
you.
you know?
So mine is, the child is not foolish. There are no more fools among children than among adults. Draped in the judicial robes of age, how often we impose thoughtless and critical and practical regulations. The wise child sometimes stops short in amazement when confronted with the aggressive, senile, offensive stupidity. And that is so true. Children can be like so resilient, and they can sometimes, I feel like sometimes they can see past our reaction, our anger, our disappointment, and I'm going to share the experience. I had like not long ago at school. We had a student, and she was designated as someone with some type of deficiency, intellectual deficiency, and all the teachers in the past would not allow her to stay in class. They would send her to the resource room to be with an aide and do her schooling there. And last year I decided to take her under my wing, and I gave her the class, the French class, and I helped her with history, so she could get her credits and get her diploma. And this year, towards the end, I was talking to her and telling her, you know, you won't have your diploma because you receive such and such classes. And then she started crying and she said, why am I coming to school? I've wasted 5 years of my life. If I had known, I would have stayed home. And it really, like, I felt like that a knife went right into my heart. Like, I was so, somehow I was ashamed because I realized I couldn't do it right. I missed something. And so, working with everything that she had, we managed to give her the credits she needed to be an adult graduate. And when I told her that we managed with everything that she had, she was able to graduate. The smile that she had was beautiful. And I'm thinking, I'm going to remember that moment for the rest of my life, because I shouldn't, I should be careful in helping kids, and it hurts me when teachers are putting them aside and saying, you're not good enough in my class. And we have to be really careful how we treat children.
Yeah, beautiful story. Who else about this? Does anyone have the same?
I have the same one.
Yeah.
And I think when we were talking about it was just sort of more of that acknowledgement that children are people. They're no less than adults. And I was talking a bit about in my role is to amplify the child's voice, and often there's adults who are assuming they already know what the child is going to say, or they already know what the issues are that they're going to bring up, and in fact they don't. And so I was just sharing a bit about how it often feels that somehow children's voices or children's insights are given less weight than adults, and in my experience adults just as likely to have flawed thinking or flawed ways of doing things as children are.
Many times more. Adults are rigid in many ways.
Yeah.
And they shut down some kids instead of encouraging them to say what they have.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
He's responding to us.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, anyone else with the same quote or who wants to say something? Jane?
No, I just,
No?
we have the same quote. I'm just indicating.
Oh, the same, three of you have, okay. Oh, sure. Okay. Anyone else about this one? Okay. Who wants to be next? Okay.
So the quote I have is 100 children, 100 individuals who are people. Not people to be, not people of tomorrow, but people now. Right now, today. And like for me, I got a couple things out of this. One of it was like the repetition just in the quote itself really, I think, places the emphasis on the sentiment that's come through in a lot of these quotes. And how tirelessly he worked at really pushing this mentality that like children and youth and young people are just as valid as other people. And I think, like personally, I work in a space where they're very encouraging of young people actively participating, but I know that that is challenging a lot of like mainstream and bigger institutions. And I just always come back to the thought of how we constantly encourage and foster young people to like be learners but also teachers, because as much as yes, like you need to have professional experience, I think there's always a place where young people can have a voice, and oftentimes like that is just immediately shut down. And so it's hard to like fight for that.
Okay. About this, same thing. No one has the same quote, no? Does anyone want to say anything about 100 children, 100 individuals?
I think it talks a lot to sort of that children are people, not possessions. And that's a conversation that comes up all the time, even just in personal life, in terms of, have people choosing to raise their children and, oh, I won't let them play with that kid, or for whatever reason, I'm just like, know that they will have to make decisions for themselves. So why are you not setting them up to make decisions and live with consequences of those decisions?
And why do you think why? Why we're not doing it, many of us?
It takes a lot more energy to acknowledge an individual and all their uniqueness and validate their uniqueness in that. And I also think that it's very often mainstream society has thought of children as possessions, not as people.
How about courage? Do we need courage to accept the fact? Yeah.
Well, and to be vulnerable with our own children, to say, I didn't do that right, or I need to acknowledge you're different than me.
Yeah.
My biggest pet peeve is parents who are like, yeah, they're so mean. And I'm like, yeah, they are. They have a lot of you, but they're them, too. Like, they're different than you.
My dean at Seattle Pacific University. Anyone? Yeah, sure.
Dare to dream, something will always come of it. I think, we can probably all relate to this to some degree, where we like shoot for something and it doesn't happen, but like maybe something greater happens that we're like, oh yeah, this makes so much more sense. But I think what's so beautiful about children is just like there are less, the confines of dreaming is like not really there. Like they can dream as much as they want. And for me, I used to babysit this boy when he was like, I don't know, 5. He's 13 now. But when he was 5, he was like, I want to become a mermaid. And I'm like, yeah, cool. And his parents also really fostered that spirit of like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. And so they put him in like a lot of swimming classes and things like that, and he really enjoyed them. Is he a mermaid now? No. Is he going to be a mermaid? I don't know. But he's in a swim team now, and he's just like really loving it. And I think that's like, yeah, I think it's really important to notice those moments and like they see themselves as people of the world and like themselves in the future. And I think that's really important too. I mean, for me, I didn't really have that growing up, which is so important for me now.
So don't try to become a teacher overnight with psychological bookkeeping in your heart and educational theory in your head. So this quote I totally agree with, because I feel like it takes a lot of love to be a teacher. It's not because of the knowledge. I feel like if you don't love to teach, you don't love children, you won't last in this education for many years. So yeah, definitely feel like we shouldn't we shouldn't educate children only because we learn how to do it. We have to like respect them and love them and really see the people, see them as people, as individuals.
I want you to think of one teacher in your life who, as a child, you knew was wrong in the profession. Like, as a child, you knew that this teacher was definitely wrong with the choice. And tell us why. Because clearly, when we are students, school students, we know this teacher is definitely horrible, and we know why as children, but no one listens to us. So think of any teacher, you don't have to give the name, but think what you thought at the time, and as a child, why would you consider that teacher bad?
A teacher being rigid,
Okay.
being open to change how they do something.
Okay, good.
Being like strict and cold.
Cold, okay. Abusive.
Using power.
Okay, good.
Unable to connect.
Could not make a connection with the students.
Okay, Judith?
No, I had another question for you.
Sure, okay. Secret.
I think the unable to connect what we
Okay, okay.
I remember when I was at school, I had a teacher that would say, because I went to a Catholic school, that children are to be seen, not heard. And that if a teacher or an adult says something is blue but it is black, that it is blue. And so we just have to go with what.
Okay. Okay.
I had a teacher that it often felt like they were trying to like strip individuality of the students. I went to a very like progressive school when I was little, and it was a teacher that just really didn't align with the school moral, and she was the only one, and would very much like try and enforce like you need to wear a certain thing, you need to look a certain way, you need to stand a certain way, and it was the only teacher in the school. She really didn't fit in.
Okay, Jane?
I can't remember those ones, but I can remember the one, why I love the one I love.
Okay.
And I was terrified to go into her class because she was not an attractive looking person, and many of the other kids, the older kids, said, oh, her classes are horrible. And I went into her class and I had the exact opposite experience. And she had very high standards. She demanded an enormous amount of us, and she believed that we could do it. And what I saw, and not just I, but other people in the class, was how her eyes lit up. And in fact, I was very fortunate because I had her for grade 4, and then she moved up to grade 5, and we moved up with her. And she was a real yardstick for me for years of somebody who, you know, she didn't talk down to us. She didn't make it easy for us. She made it difficult, and she helped us. She said, you can do it. And we did.
Okay. Judith, you wanted to say something?
No, I just wanted to say the worst teacher I had was afraid of the
She was afraid of the
kids.
kids.
It was a
Here, okay.
Yeah, I was just afraid of.
And how would you know that he was afraid?
The way he.
So as a child, you could understand this, that he was afraid.
Yeah. The discipline he tried to enforce, the way he talked to the kids, like not being intelligent, he was demeaning them very hard. So that came from his fear of being judged or being interrupted. So that was the worst one.
Okay. Alice?
Yeah, so I think the worst teacher I met would be like, she's really judgmental. And then she, for example, like she would talk to my mom, like saying, oh, your daughter is too shy, she won't be able to achieve anything if she's keep like this. And then also like same thing she would say like other things to other children. I don't really think that's a good way to inspire people. But like interestingly, I actually, because I really want to prove she is wrong.
So it worked well for you.
Yeah,